Well, joining me now to break it down is resident political expert and host of Common Threads, JD Durkin. JD, it's great to have you on the show.
Good morning. First of all, I appreciate that kind intro, and I can't believe that we're actually here on the eve of the election.
Here.
We talk about this for years, and it never feels like it's going to be here, but great to be here with you for an awesome week.
It's great to have you. So let's start by getting our viewers caught up. Of course, we had that disappointing jobs report on Friday. We knew that probably these candidates would use that as final talking points heading into Election Day. How have we seen that narrative transpire?
Especially use it for fuel. If you are former President Donald Trump, you're trying to get back into the White House. Obviously, the Trump campaign was very quick on Friday morning. It wasn't not even 9 a.m. on Friday. The Trump campaign out with a statement. They called it brutal. From their perspective, they're framing this as a failure of Bidenomics. And of course, we heard from former President Trump later on in the weekend speak about it in really harsh tones. He's trying to say, hey, look at this top line figure. This is the very problem with the incumbency and why you should vote for me. As for Democrats, they've been more inclined to say this is not really in line with the overall trends that we've seen. This is because of storms. This is because of strikes. Let's not forget that 2.8% GDP reading we got. Let's not forget unemployment still near a historic low at 4.1%. Kristen, you know better than anyone. When we get these jobs reports, you get different surveys, different bits of information. Both campaigns conveniently going with the ones that they think strengthen their case days before people go to the polls.
I think you bring up a good point, though. Of course, this jobs report vastly skewed by those hurricanes, 2 of them last month, as well as that Boeing strike. So we'll see how it shakes out on Election Day tomorrow. But what did the final pre-election polls, JD, tell us about which candidate voters think is better equipped to handle the economy?
Of any of the polls out there, my absolute favorites are the one that ask voters, who do you have more confidence in to handle stewardship of the U.S. economy moving forward? And for the vast majority of this year, Kristen, it clearly has tilted in Donald Trump's favor. The good news for Vice President Kamala Harris is she managed to really close that gap in the final weeks. You look at the New York Times Siena poll, ask likely voters a version of that question. Donald Trump had a 13 percentage point lead. They did the same poll to the same type of voters just 4 or 5 days ago. Vice President Harris managed to narrow that down to 6 points. So the challenge is still certainly there. I think the advantage to former President Trump is that in these key swing states in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, he's actually doing a bit better than that 6-point national margin. That speaks to his benefit and really the perception of voters out there that it's the Republican Party and Donald Trump who they feel at least talk a bit better about economic circumstances.
The Wall Street Journal had a great story recently about how economists think each candidate will have an economy that would play out if they are to be elected. And of course, the disparity there between voters as well. And so that dynamic certainly always at play, JD. But what are the closing messages, the closing arguments, if we will, that we hear from these campaigns specifically to the business community?
Yeah, I think from Donald Trump, it continues to be higher tariffs, lower taxes. And he's going to look at the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, also known as the Trump tax cuts affectionately here on Wall Street, and remind people in the business community your tax cuts that you love that we passed years ago, they're set to expire at the end of 2025. Therefore, vote for me, and the Republicans will get these over the finish line for you. Again, it's been interesting to watch Democrats and Vice President Harris make the rule of law argument in terms of the economy. In other words, saying, look at the chaos that Donald Trump can bring. That's what they say anyway. And markets want stability. You also don't want, so says Vice President Harris, President Trump, who will individually target CEOs, may individually target businesses, and therefore rattle investor confidence. So bit of those dueling messages down the stretch. That has been the name of the game for the last month, and I noticed that really front and center with campaign events in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, where both candidates were zipping back and forth between all those swing states the last 72 hours.
I know you've been following the Elon Musk factor here as it relates to the election. How did he spend his time and efforts specifically endorsing former President Trump here as we get closer to Election Day?
I don't know how Elon Musk managed to run the number of businesses he does, because I feel like he is on X, his platform formerly known as Twitter, basically full-time. According to one New York Times count, more than 3,000 posts in the last month alone. So he's really cornered this incredible piece of digital real estate, the likes of which we haven't had, and for his perspective, to back the campaign of former President Trump. He's also made a handful of key in-person events in recent weeks, right? Last Sunday, he was here in New York City for the MSG rally. He was alongside the former president in Butler, Pennsylvania. And we can't forget about his pro-Trump super PAC, more than $130 million from Musk personally to boost battleground swing state voter support, make sure people are registered, make sure they're out there to support Donald Trump. That's a really interesting dynamic, and we'll see how it goes, whether or not it pays off. But I can't remember, having done this for a while, really someone in Elon Musk's position leveraging his power and quite literally his billions of dollars to try and support one candidate over another.
Yeah, interesting storylines that we definitely follow in the business world. Not so sure how much American voters, the average voter, might be following Elon Musk, but certainly worthwhile to point out. JD, I also want to talk about which sectors might be most impacted here. If you could just list a few, we're about short on time.
Absolutely. We've talked about the Trump trade, so look for crypto, the small cap stocks, which have done very well. Look for financial shares of XLF, the third best performing sector in the S&P. For Harris, I think home builders and some key healthcare names might look to drag down some of those profit margins for companies like Eli Lilly and Merck if they are able to put caps on prescription drug prices. But Harris has also talked about expanding healthcare coverage. Could be a benefit for names like Humana as well as UNH, United Healthcare, the most weighted name in the Dow.
Thank you so much. JD Durkin, of course, host of Common Threads here at the Stock Exchange.
Thanks.